I'm Eric Chemi, and this is Politely Pushy. Jon Geater is my guest today. He's the co-founder and chief product officer of RKVST. And RKVST is really interesting to me as I was researching you ahead of time. Digital supply chain. It's the first time I've heard that phrase. And I'm not as tech savvy as you, but digital supply chain, when we hear the word supply chain, we think of real things moving, right? In a truck, right? And getting across the country in boats and planes and all that. Digital supply chain, I'm really intrigued because we're going to get into cybersecurity. We're going to get into blockchain. We're going to get into a lot of really important things. You guys do nuclear waste handling on the digital side. You do some really sensitive work. So Jon, thank you for joining me on the show today. And just briefly explain to me, what does RKVST do and what does a digital supply chain mean?
So thanks, Eric. Great question, and thanks for having me. You've mentioned all of those many words, right? And some of them are extremely virtual and abstract, like a blockchain. Some of them are extremely physical and interesting, like the nuclear materials handling that we handle. So everything in a supply chain is real in the end. But increasingly, the way that we manage those processes and the movement of trucks across the country, if that's how you want to say it, is with data in one way or another. It's either digital systems, it's files, it's IoT devices, whatever it is. Something that is inescapable now is that the supply chain, whether it's extremely physical or whether it's completely virtual on the internet, is absolutely full of cyber stuff, of digital files, of computer processes. And so what we do is we make sure that everything that you used to do in the real world with physical stuff that you could see and touch and smell, and all of the checking and verification and provenance that you had for that as you looked the person in the eye who you knew, and you physically take that thing from them, and you know that you've got the right one and only version of that thing to go about your business. We make sure that all of that real world trust and confidence that you used to have with tangible stuff, you can continue to have in the world's increasingly digital and digitized operations. So it could mean a couple of different things, right? You've got a real digital supply chain, totally pure digital. I'm getting software, I'm getting data, I'm getting devices that come into me. That's a supply chain of its own. And it's big and it's complex and it requires a new challenge. But actually, what we're really trying to do is to not like revolutionize the world all at once overnight, but actually to take the real stuff that people do every day that is being overtaken and overwhelmed by digital operations and processes, and keep it all manageable. So when you get a file that represents a bit of nuclear material, you know you've got the right one, and you know you can keep working just as well as you did before that.
When I hear what you're saying, it makes me think about the deep fakes, right? When how do I know that I'm actually talking to Jon right now, or some person pretending to be Jon on a video? I know that's not exactly what you do, but it makes you think about a podcast, an interview, something that we would have done in person now is all being done digital. There's so many things that were in person, and there was a provenance of like, you're talking to Eric, I'm talking to Jon, and now I'm pretty sure it's you, but like, you never know what could happen in a world where all these different interactions among things and people and money and safety and security, it really is impossible to know for sure that you can trust the entire process along the way.
Yeah, that's exactly spot on. I mean, you use that word provenance. Really, when you think about it, any issues of trust or confidence or security, they come down to some sense of provenance. Yeah, where did this thing come from? And you can imagine all kinds of ways that this works. But you build up trust with people based on knowing them, interacting with them a bunch of times, knowing who you're dealing with. You build up trust on let's say food. Right? It's a little coarse maybe, but a simple, easy to understand analogy is that I'm sure many of us, when we were very small, our mothers told us, don't put that in your mouth if you don't know where it's been. Right? This is the whole issue of interacting with anything, using anything for any real purpose. You kind of want to know where it came from before you'll use it. And so, that's exactly right. If it's important to you to know that you're talking to the real me, and not one of 600 avatar clones of me, then you need some way of verifying that. Of course, there are cases where it doesn't matter and people are perfectly happy to interact with clones. But the point is, you should have the opportunity and the choice to know and to verify that if it's important to you. And that's the choice that we give to people.
You mentioned food. I'm looking at an article that you had written recently about how trends to watch in supply chain security. And you reference early on in the UK, a meat scandal, defendants being accused of passing off horse meat unfit for human consumption,
Oh yeah.
pretending it's beef. And it's just like you said, you buy something at the store, you have no idea. Like I'm hoping and trusting that everyone along the way is saying correctly what it is.
Yeah, exactly right. Right. That kind of traceability. There's lots of different concerns that people would have. Food is a very kind of visceral concern. Cybersecurity is more of a political kind of concern. But they all do come down to that idea of understanding where things came from and possibly where they're going wrong. And that traceability is really, really interesting from that point of view, because sometimes what something that's fine for some people won't be fine for others. And so another of these sort of trends in the supply chain side, and as we become more digitized, and so virtual, and the temptation once you're virtual is to like change stuff all the time because software is really easy to change. So as all of these opportunities show up, it brings forward a truth that I think was always present, but is now actually really important to solve, which is that my risk isn't your risk. And my priorities are not your priorities. Right. And so there is no 100% security or 100% reliability or good, even dare I say, with the horse meat lasagna scandal that we had a few years ago. Some people don't care. I didn't care, right? Personally, is the reason I cared about that as a consumer was because, well, if I could be eating horse as beef, then I couldn't be sure that the horse meat itself was well treated and safe. So I actually personally, I didn't mind that it wasn't cow, but it affected me a little bit because, well, maybe it wasn't clean, or maybe the animal was diseased or something like that. Other people would really, really care, and they'd want to know. And so again, this whole issue of sort of supply chain transparency as a security measure and as a measure of trust is not about trying to say that we're bringing up a huge wall, or we're solving concrete problems 100% and everybody's fine, but rather saying, well, you should be able to make a choice about what's acceptable to you, and only you know what means secure or safe in your business. And so you should have that information at your fingertips on your terms, and not have to go and ask somebody who might not have your same incentives to tell you if you should eat this lasagna or not.
Exactly. When I'm reading every day in the news, I see everyday endless cybersecurity hacks, problems, leaks, mistakes. What's your take on it? You're more in tune than I am because you're on the inside of this current landscape. You think it's better, worse, the same as it's been in the past?
So I've been in this game for nearly 25 years. And I think it's worse from a value point of view. The problem with cybersecurity, and particularly stories about hacks and things, is that it's an unwinnable game. Somebody will always get through, and the standard sort of red team, blue team thing is the defenders have to get it right 100% of the time. And the attackers only have to get it right once ever, and they win. Right. So it's a bit of an unwinnable game, and I don't like to sort of highlight people's failures or really play on particular hacks, because often they're more down to bad luck about who got hit. They were inevitable; it was going to happen, but who actually ends up in the headlines? That's a bit of a sort of a race. However, the reason that I now do what I do, and I'm focusing on the sort of supply chain integrity side of things, is because I think traditional cyber defenses have kind of gone as far as they can go. And so when I say that things are getting worse from a value point of view, I mean, if you look at the statistics of spend, it's going up. Cybersecurity spending is going up and to the right. And if you look at the statistics on attacks and the value of hacks, they're also going up and to the right. So clearly something is not working. And I think the issue there is to understand that, well, as soon as you put a defense, the attackers are just going to go somewhere else. And bringing this into the supply chain realm again, what's happening quite a lot is two things that are not well served by the traditional cybersecurity market. There's the small guys. So the basic, easy thing with supply chain hacks, as we've seen many times over the last few years, is that it's really hard, actually. There's still success. I mean, just in December of last year, Microsoft and Samsung got pretty seriously hacked. But nonetheless, it's pretty hard to attack the big guys because the big guys have big budgets, they've got big security teams, and they've got fast response. But if you can hack somebody 2 or 3 stages down the line who are providing a critical component, but they're a tiny, 10-man specialist shop, then you still get in and you still win. And the traditional kind of fortress, siloed, IT-centric market that we've had for the last sort of 30 years or so is not good at dealing with threats that started somewhere else and you willingly bring them in. It's good at threats that you unwillingly bring in, but not the ones that actually come through your operations. And that's a place where we need to deal with. The other thing on supply chain, which people don't focus on because it's not a sexy security story, but actually results in a lot of security breaches, is that not everything is an attack. So the other thing you have to really look for is that it's not just terrorists and it's not just criminals. There are a lot of those about, obviously, a lot of cyber criminals, a lot of people trying to make a quick buck. They do exist. But an unfortunate truth of today's digital world, which is built on huge amounts of open source software and on open intelligence and on sort of cobbled together bits of services and so on, is that you can have something which is secure in the sense that it kind of does what it was intended to do, but that might still not be good enough for what you wanted. Famously, when Java was released, the front page of the programmer's guide was, this is not a real-time thing and you must not use it for nuclear operations, right? and things like that. And also mistakes. People can make honest mistakes that don't matter in one context that are extremely important in another. So if you look at AI, it's okay if Spotify suggests a tune 1 time in 100 that I don't like. And it's okay if Amazon or eBay suggests a product 1 time in 100 that I don't like. But it is not okay if a self-driving vehicle 1 time in 100 runs somebody over. And so all of these considerations about visibility and understanding the whole system, those are the things that are not well served today. And I think that's really the reason why these attacks are starting to get through, is because people aren't going head on at the firewalls and the encryption services. They're coming around the side, attacking with the system weaknesses instead.
Tell me about public attestation. Why is that so important?
Oh, so this is a nice thing. There's a lot of there are a lot of words coming out at the moment in the standards organizations, but attestation, meaning a witness statement, effectively, is a technique that's getting quite a lot of traction in a number of places. In the blockchain communities, it's quite a big deal. But also, I spend quite a lot of my time in the IETF, the place where the RFCs are made, and on the supply chain integrity, transparency, and trust grouping. It's a big thing there as well. The thing with attestations is that it allows you to sort of make observations, take measurements, make trust judgments about things in general. So traditionally, when you have computer trust, when you have sort of end-to-end signing and things like that, you have a conversation with a thing. It's either an IT device, or it's a smart card, or it's another computer system, and it signs its own stuff. And then you have to trust it or not, and you just take its word for it. The crucial thing with attestations is that there is usually a third party involved. So you're not talking to the thing, you're talking about the thing. And so a qualified observer gets to say, yes, I saw that and I tested it and it was fine. And then another one can say the same sort of thing, or they could go the other way. They could say, well, I I ate this beef lasagna from this shop and it was terrible, tasted like horse. And if 4 or 5 people make those attestations, you can make your own trust judgments based on that. So attestations is growing as a security technique, especially in the zero trust world, because it allows you to gather a kind of reputation for things and data that you're interacting with. Now, the crucial thing with public attestation is that you get to have this very high quality conversation with the world around you about what environment you're entering. So you can sort of post a poster statement about something you've created. For example, we have some interesting use cases in IP protection, anti-counterfeiting, that kind of stuff, where somebody says, "Boom, I made this thing." And they can put up a statement which is cryptographically strong, it's time-stamped, it proves that they made that claim, it proves that they own the thing they were talking about. And then if anybody else ever shows up and says, I made this or I own this thing, or conversely, they sort of kind of find it lying under a rock and they want to say, well, I kind of want to use this, but I have no idea where it came from. You're able to very rapidly, without setting up big infrastructures, without paying huge amounts of money to 4 or 5 different large cloud service providers, you're able to just very rapidly establish, what is this thing I have in my hands and do I want to use it? And on the other side, if you're in a dispute, you get to very rapidly say, no, my version definitely came first, so I own this thing. So it's a combination of 2 things. The attestation part is a very, very crucial part of zero trust architectures. And the public nature of that, with lots of clever but happily kind of one-click style identity verification and stuff, is what makes it really quick and easy to use that in the real world. So you can just cover yourself, you can protect your interests, and then off you go, go about your business, knowing that you're safe if in the future somebody, as yet unidentified, wants to come after you or wants to take some of your value.
You mentioned zero trust architecture right now. Is there any difference in how these architectures work, your trust and verification, when we're talking about supply chain visibility for physical goods versus that software supply chain visibility? Can you articulate that difference?
It does, yeah. And there are, it's interesting the order of words you use, because you say trust and verify, and actually what we're trying to get to is a world where you verify first, then trust. And this is kind of the important difference. So with
don't trust at all.
Don't trust at all. Don't trust. Just if you verify every time first, you don't need to blindly trust the thing, right? And that's an issue. Just sort of rewinding a little bit, but talking about the history of cyber and where these things are important. Security is always just a matter of how deeply you check. It's always a matter of how many questions do I ask, or how deep in the rabbit hole do I go before I'm satisfied, right? And that's really what we're looking to do here. So the difference with physical and virtual goods is interesting. There are a handful of them, right? So there's speed. I hope that anybody listening to this who's in the digital game isn't in that game purely to make computers work for their own sake or to write software because it's fun. We build software products and we build cloud services to make real things faster or better or cheaper or more reliable. These are tools like any other. And so those software tools need to run at the same speed as what we're dealing with. So with things like nuclear materials handling or things like advanced manufacturing, the number of documents exchanged or the number of containers or bags processed is quite small per day, relatively. And so that's a case where really what you're doing is just making the process of documenting your life easier. And to give you some idea of what we deal with in some of those heavier industrial sides, they waste a lot of time and a lot of sort of brain power and human capital simply filling in paperwork and then checking the paperwork and then filing the paperwork and having that filing authorized in order for it to be redacted and then
You're going to
packaged.
put people out of work. That's their job, though. I need to spend all day filling out all this paperwork and doing all these steps, right?
Yeah, but a lot of those people actually have more interesting, important jobs to do too. And they would rather be doing their valuable work than filling in and verifying and cross-checking and duplicating paperwork, which, by the way, also leads to problems of things like transcription errors. So, yeah, although it seems very comforting to create 3 or 4 or 5 copies of a bit of paper for record-keeping purposes, that introduces its own problem, because if somebody copies a 1 as an L or an O as a 0, that can actually introduce
worse. You'd be better off having fewer copies.
Exactly, and that's what this allows you to do, right? Is having sort of digitizing the physical supply chain. That's really what that's doing. So on the sort of software side, looking for the differences between these two things, on the one hand, we're kind of reducing the burden of manual physical processes. It's not real sort of productive work. It's just reflecting the real productive work that happened. With the digital side, it's a bit different because it happens at a much higher speed. If you've got things like data packets coming through, you're doing things like threat intelligence. If you're doing stuff like software updates, the volume and the pace of updates is much, much quicker. And so rather than assisting a human operator or a manual process and just making that much better, it really is essential to actually remove manual processes. It is not possible, and it's never been possible, to do things like complete software bill of materials management and validation at human speeds. There's just too much of it, and nobody wants to do it anyway. And so in that case, what you're looking at is not so much of a sort of reverse time audit benefit where you've collected the right data, and if you need it in 3 or 4 years time, you can go back and that it's still there, which is a great benefit, and we do that. But in the digital world, there's much more of a real-time immediate benefit of, well, if I can validate and verify the data sources and the intelligence sources that are coming into me, and I know that I can rely on that data to make smart decisions, I can actually automate smart decisions, like letting in access requests versus not letting them in, about taking a patch or not taking a patch, about opening the fire doors when the fire alarm goes off, or actually knowing that it's a spoof signal, right? So the pure digital world has that pace and real-time element to it as well, which I think Zero Trust can't really work without this, because if you have to keep on sending tickets to the support desk and have a real person respond to all those access requests, it ain't going to work.
What in the past year, conversations you've had with business leaders, customers, CTOs, CEOs, what is maybe the most common issue that you're having to explain to them? Like, this is the most important thing that we need you guys to fix, that we need you to implement. Is there a common theme in conversations that you had over the past year?
Yes, I think it all comes down to this idea of appropriate transparency. So there's a great book by, in fact, I'm looking at it now on the other side of the screen that no one else can see, by David Brin, called The Transparent Society. It's a nice quote, not his quote, it's a quote of somebody else. Says, everybody wants accountability for others and privacy for themselves. And so there's a small mindset shift that, thankfully, when we have these conversations, it gets through very, very easily. But there's a bit of a mindset shift to say, look, everybody has problems with the data they're dealing with. Everybody has problems with compliance and audit and proving that they did the right thing with the best available information at the time. You know that. What if you could instantly trust all of the data that's coming through? You could instantly validate that what you're dealing with now is exactly what was sent to you by the other side, without having 4 or 5 or 6 other additional verification or duplication or filing steps. Wouldn't that be great? And say, yes, that's great. Okay. There is a quid pro quo to this, which is that kind of everybody has to play that game. So everybody has to act transparently and openly, not in absolutely everything they do. That's obviously ludicrous, but in the information that is already currently traded in order to make these business relationships work, let's make all of that accountable. And that's okay. And they say, well, but some of this stuff is really sensitive because we're working in a competitive environment. We don't want to expose our yield or our conversations to our competitors. And that's the point at which we have to kind of bring up that the state of the technical art now is good enough to give you both transparency and privacy. You can have protected small group conversations that also within that group are fully transparent and accountable.
How does that work? That seems like an oxymoron. It seems a conundrum. Give an example, if you can, how that might work.
Well, without getting into too many technical details.
Not too many details, but just conceptually how that could work.
Yeah, it's keys all the way down, right? So the way that we do that is with a technology called confidential transactions at our DLT layer, and then a lot of regular identity management at the top layer. So what we're able to do is create little networks, like mini networks of people. So the customer is completely in charge of what data they share with whom. And then anytime that information is changed or updated, the DLT platform makes sure that it's distributed to everybody, open, verifiable, time-stamped, irrefutable, all those wonderful words. But it does that with an intermediate layer that does a thing that's called destination-based encryption. So all of the actual data is protected and wrapped up by keys that only the authorized people are allowed to see. So the world can see that there was data, but that's it. They don't know what was in it. They don't know where it went. And only if you were an authorized recipient can you actually get that data back. And the beauty of this, of course, is that people might say, well, why do we need any fancy new technology for that? Why do we need new acronyms like attestation or SCIT? And the answer to that is that we've dealt so far with 2 of the 3 regular cryptographic security elements. This famous CIA triangle. We have the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So confidentiality is well solved. You encrypt stuff, you're done. We've been good at that for a long time. Integrity has not been terribly well done. And that's what the kind of the distributed ledger space and the signing and identity spaces take care of. And that's a huge part of the sort of innovation that we're pioneering right now. But the last one, the availability piece, is really, really important. Historically, it's been seen as a bit of a safety net to say, look, if you're encrypting your data, that's because you need it back, right? So don't encrypt your data. If you didn't need it back, you might as well delete it, right? So please make sure, if you're encrypting things, that you do it in a way that it's retrievable later when you need it for business reasons. And it's been very kind of egocentric on a single party who's keeping stuff for their own purposes, and they want to get it back themselves at a later date. The issue with availability when it comes to supply chain operations, when it comes to things like connected infrastructure, if we're ever actually going to have our self-driving vehicles, if we're ever actually going to have really efficient, clean, green, connected public services, is that has to apply across borders as well. So if I've been relying on some information that came from your database, and then, heaven forbid, we get into a dispute, I don't want to have to come and ask you to let me get into your database to prove my case against you. That never works. This is the sort of sad day case, which is a big problem. And what we, he likes to steal the show. And so what we additionally bring, which is the thing that is not so well known, is that once you have had access to this data, you now can prove that you had access to that data. You can prove where it came from, and you can prove it's untampered without having to go on rely on either a person you're in a dispute with, or even more common, a small supplier or a person who no longer exists at all, and their databases aren't online anymore, and there isn't anybody to phone. So that completing out the CIA triangle, that's really powerful, and that's pretty new. And that's the piece where when you talk to the seasoned guys, they don't quite see all three of those pieces, and we have to bring all those three of those pieces in. And then once they get it, happy days. Then we're off to the races.
That's really good explanation. Thank you for that. You've written about trends coming up, let's say for this year, the next 12 months. Regulation is certainly a big one. It always seems like there's more regulation. There's never less regulation, right? More rules, more things to deal with.
Yeah.
Do you see unintended consequences with that? Do you see a world where, hey, the rule had good intentions, but it will create an outcome because people couldn't get there quickly, or created a loophole? It created an opportunity that just wasn't foreseen at the time.
Yeah, I vacillate on that. In fact, my most recent article that just got published, I think yesterday, possibly as many as 36 hours ago, was entitled "Don't Wait for Regulation, Just Do the Right Thing." So I do go back and forth. I think it's unfortunately the case that a lot of sort of security or safety type operations really need regulation because people just don't move until that happens. There are exceptions. Clearly there are very diligent companies out there. There are the sort of higher end safety folks, several of whom we work with day to day, who absolutely go to work every morning just trying to do the right thing. So I don't mean to paint all industries with a big brush, but by and large, at a large scale, people don't implement cybersecurity, cyber hygiene, or safety stuff until they have to. And so I think regulation is a necessary evil, partly because people can't do everything. Businesses can't cover every possible eventuality, and they kind of need some guidance to tell them what the important things are and where to focus. So I think we do need regulation. I am really not a fan of regulations that get very technical. Part of the
But the government is the expert at technical details, right? We should be trusting them 100% on what to do.
Only if we get to have a debate about what the word technically means. I think part of where my current business came out of is I've been working in cyber, as I said, for nearly 25 years. I've worked on very large systems, things like international rail systems, national scale electric grids and things like that, that have these big, proper, actual issues. And one of the problems with sort of safety and insurance regulations and so on is that if you are tied down to an approved operating configuration, so things like somebody's tested version 3.9 of your actuator motor software, and that's in your compliance record, then if there's a bug found in that or a hack found in that, what do? Do you upgrade to 3.10 and close off the attack, but then be out of compliance and have to order a new retest and a new reaudit or whatever? Or do you stay on the vulnerable version because you know that your insurance will pay if you're running in configuration? But it's an impossible thing because everybody knows this is a problem now. So there is no easy answer to that. And regulation can help to establish best practices, which give a kind of conversation and a framework to work out these issues and make smart decisions with the people on the ground who actually know what the right thing to do is. But at the same time, as you say, the unintended consequence of having too many regulations is that they force people to concentrate on the wrong things, because there is no single right answer for what's best in an airport versus a parking garage, right?
Well, like you said, the Amazon or Spotify examples, right? You get the wrong recommendation. That's not life or death.
Exactly. So I don't know. I think it's a necessary evil. I liked, honestly, the trajectory of the Executive Order 14028 that came out a bit over a year ago now. But even that's been a bit disappointing in the event, because it started off as a really nice kind of outcome-based directive that said, we need to be a bit more secure. We know the world moves too fast for static validation. We know that zero trust architectures are the right model. And we know that a great place to start is software bills of materials, so that at least you know what's in the box. I like that. That's good. Made sense. It's vague enough that you can implement in different situations, but it's specific enough to say, look, this is the direction we're all rowing in. But even that, over the course of the last year, kind of fell apart a bit because people started arguing about whether it was good enough, and the perfect became the enemy of the good. And then, that opened doors for more conservative people to kind of push back and say they didn't want to do it. And in the event, that hasn't really worked out as well as it might. So I think ultimately business will rule, right? If people get attacked and hacked more and more, there's a lot of conversation now in cyber insurance that cyber insurance just isn't a thing anymore. I never thought it was a thing, to be honest. It never made sense to me. But I think we're going to see.
What do you mean, like it's not a thing anymore, in the sense that like the premiums would be so high, the catastrophes are so high? Because that's been my perspective on it, is you can't charge enough for what the problem might be.
Exactly. It's just it's not a good fit for the risk it's insuring against, because if you look at the national level funds that look at big natural disasters, for example, maybe you've got a comparison that works. But in the real open commercial insurance space, or even let's make it an easier personal example, the car insurance space or health insurance, any of these things that kind of make sense and scale, they assume that bad things will happen, but they will happen rarely to a few people. And the issue with cyber, especially the way we see it with the sort of the biggest attacks being even script kiddie level stuff with ransomware, is that you go from 0 to 100 instantly, because basically everybody's vulnerable all at the same time and everybody gets hit all at the same time. And so you have these sort of jolting catastrophic events, which result, yes, in, as you said, the premium mathematics just doesn't seem to really work out. So that's the narrative. I'm not an expert in that space really, but that is exactly the narrative that I'm hearing right now and reading about quite a lot. And it makes sense to me because it's always been an all or nothing issue, really, this thing. And so if you can insure against it, please do. I mean, that's a perfectly good security approach. But if everybody's going to get hit, then the insurance companies are in a tough bind. And the other side to look at it is, well, can you really negotiate a big enough payout to cover a week's lost operations? How much does it cost? If your cloud service is down for a week, are you really going to get that $100 million back?
Are you going to go out of business because no one's going to trust you again?
Exactly. So I just don't think it works. I think people have to do a better job of looking after themselves.
I talked to a CEO of a fintech startup, and they had credit card data and all kinds of financial transactions, international transactions. And he said, we don't even get cyber insurance unless it's mandated by our vendor, because the amount we would have to pay, or the amount we would be liable for would be more money than the value of the company is worth, right? The payout of the insurance wouldn't come close to covering what we would need to pay, and we would go out of business. So it sort of just doesn't matter. The scale is so high. So I get what you're saying, but I want to ask about the Archivist solution. When you're competing for business, what makes you stand out? What are you saying to a prospect? This is why you need us. This is why you can't DIY, do it yourself. This is why you can't go to someone else. What makes your solution unique to what's in the marketplace?
Well, so that, I mean, honestly, it's just software. They could DIY it themselves, but nobody really, if you're in the business of selling cars or moving nuclear waste around or whatever else it might be, do you really want to spend your time paying licenses for 6, 7, 8 different services and writing the integration code and doing all of the cyber hygiene and doing all the digital identity management that it takes to have a fully defensible, immutable evidence ledger between parties? You probably don't. So it's, a simple thing to say is it's just much cheaper and quicker and easier than building your own bespoke database things. But actually, in the real world, we don't encounter many people who are in a position of greenfield to build a thing themselves on kind of Web3 principles and whatever else it might be from scratch. What we encounter are businesses that have real work to do, and they're running legacy systems not because they love them, but because they have to. And they have hundreds or even thousands of staff who are trained in using those systems, and they don't want to throw all of that away and replace it. And you know, the vast majority of solutions that offer the same kind of level of integrity and protection that we do require you to swap over and replace your database with a more secure database, or replace your CRM with a different pipe CRM, or whatever it might be. And what we do, and what we concentrate on, you know, very, very keenly, is making sure that we're as least disruptive as possible to the operations that the regular everyday people have to do. And we plug in an integrity layer that just makes sure that no matter what application you're in, no matter what process you're running, if you're relying on this data, or it becomes part of your audit evidence, or it becomes part of a critical decision in some kind of digital transformation space, that layer takes care of the zero trust and verification and the proof that you did the right thing based on the right data. But ideally, you don't see us at all. Nobody on the ground sees our logo. We're just quietly keeping track of it with simple APIs, simple, you know, zero footprint, zero code integrations, and you know, in happy day case, we're just invisible. And that's really the thing that we're going for. We don't want to overthrow the entire world. We just want to underpin it.
It's amazing how much so many of these solutions are. In an ideal world, you won't know that it exists. In an ideal world, nothing happens. Nobody knows. There's nothing dead. It's just a zero and everything's normal. Jon, I appreciate the time. Really, really insightful. I learned a lot from this conversation. Thank you so much for breaking it down for me.
Well, thank you, Eric.
Thank you to my guest, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to get the latest episodes each week, and we'll see you next time.